All right, hello, welcome to U.S. History Honors, your concurrent class. I'm Mrs. Hall. We are starting week 5, so this is our weekly instruction video, just kind of reviewing some things that have been due, letting you know what's closing because those late windows are coming up. And then I'll do a quick overview of this week's assignment, okay? So you're going to want to have Canvas open. All right, make sure that you're checking the announcement. So every week I'm doing an announcement, tells you what's due, what's past due, that's still open, and then when we're meeting, okay? So for this week, we're doing Module 1, Lesson 4, okay? The LGBTQ plus LGBTQ and other movements, all right? We're gonna look at the checking for understanding, and then you'll be completing a notebook, all right? It is due this Friday, September 8th. If you are behind and you're trying to bring up your grade or you're past due, there's a couple things that are open. Remember, there's a 1-week window, late window with NVLA, and then I'm giving 2. But after that, it is closed permanently. All right, I will not open it because I already doubled the late period. Okay, so Module 1, Lesson 2 was due on Friday the 25th. So that's going to be closing this Friday the 8th. That'll be the end of that 2-week late window. Okay, so if you're behind or needing to bring up your grade, I would do that checking for understanding, the notebook, the quiz. Okay. Module 1, Lesson 3, that was due last Friday, checking for understanding, notebook, quiz. Those can still be completed. Those are open for another week, okay? But again, yeah, if you're behind, you're trying to get your grade up, get in those late assignments, especially the assessments, are going to be really helpful, okay? I did want to point out this week, normally I am online for the Google Meet for live help if you want to drop in and get help from 4 to 5. I have to bump it from 4:30 to 5:30 this week, okay? So if I have an appointment that I can't miss and stuff. So I'll be getting home a little bit after 4. Okay, so I apologize for that 30-minute delay. And I will send out a remind just to remind that it will be a little bit late. Okay, so for this week, we're going to still in Module 1. We're working on Lesson 4. And again, remember, you can always go to these weekly live session instruction pages, which again lists the due dates. And then this is where they have the weekly summary video like I'm recording right now. All right, so we are in Lesson 4, LGBTQ plus movement inquiry, okay? And there's just one thing due this week, and it's going to be the notebook going along with the lesson, okay? So to start, we go to notebook, all right? We're gonna open that up, all right? Make a copy. When you open it, remember there's 2 things that you wanna do, okay? You can rename it, save it to your Google Drive. I would have a U.S. history folder. All right, so save it to your Google Drive and then make it shareable. Okay, and then you're going to want to do anyone with the link to make it shareable. Okay, so you'll keep this open and then you'll go into Canvas. And as you click through each page, remember you kind of toggle back and forth and you are completing those portions of the notebook that correspond with Canvas. Sorry, I'm recording this a little bit later at night and stuff. I should have probably done it earlier. So I'll be ready for bed after this. All right. So the goal from this lesson is that you can answer and construct supporting questions using evidence generated from the inquiry process to support questions. Evaluate the impact and success of the movement's process. Okay, so we'll go to introduction. All right, so about this inquiry will lead you through an investigation of the LGBTQ plus movement, primarily driven by the history of the movement through various accounts and perspectives. And you'll see on the next page, we're going to look at it from several different perspectives. Media perspective, people within the movement perspective, court decision perspectives and stuff, and the impact over time that this has had on the movement. While this inquiry does focus on the LGBTQ plus movement, you can also draw from other movements in history with respect to organization, activism, overall execution, including civil rights movement, women's suffrage, or other rights movements. The inquiry will focus on 4 aspects that are that can potentially shape a movement in its foundation as it rises, namely public reaction, government leadership and policy, Supreme Court cases, personal experiences. You will examine each individual aspect independently, evaluating the merit, strengths, and significance that it provides from the source. So again, this is focused on the LGBTQ plus movement, but you can also take from it just the pattern of movements in general, the trends of movements in general. When they start kind of small, grassroots, not a lot of support over time, and how that process often goes. A lot of movements have a similar process as far as how they gain momentum. They start on the outskirts, how they gain momentum and support, and then become more mainstream and eventually, hopefully, gain more public support. Okay, so definitely looking at it through the LGBTQ plus lens, but as I said, you can use inferences to other movements, civil rights movements, women's suffrage, and other rights movements that have followed a similar path as far as kind of what it looks like again when you're starting out and you're oftentimes on the outskirts of society, not accepted by society, and then moving into a more accepted role socially and then politically and laws, and how that progression takes place. For change to come about, there's a simple way of kind of looking at it, okay? Change always socially happens first before it does politically. Politics is always coming late, okay? Movements start with social movements, social change. And as it gains acceptance and it gains more, public awareness and this and that, and gains more support, then you start to gain support from within the system, within politics. And then eventually that can actually impact laws. Laws are usually one of the last things that come around, okay? So most movements, it's stuff that are going from kind of one extreme to another or introducing something that hasn't been in the mainstream of society. And again, this is kind of drawing inferences of trends of how movements go, is that they start as social movements. On the outskirts, they become more mainstream, okay, more accepted, whether or not you're a part of that, whether or not you support that movement, okay? And then politics start to get involved and people run on those campaigns, okay? And then eventually laws become or can be impacted through those movements. Okay, so the compelling question, what makes a movement successful? Okay, so again, looking at it through a very specific lens, but also drawing that we can see patterns of movements in general, and again, how they go from one aspect of society to another to actually seeing political and laws change, supporting or changing or going with the movement. What makes a movement successful? Okay, so you're going to put that in number 1, your compelling questions. You can copy and paste it. Okay, we'll go to the next page. So these 4 different tabs, we're going to look at kind of 4 different points of view on the movement, okay? And I'll kind of talk you through a couple of these to kind of get you going to understand what you need to do, and then you'll complete this independently. Before we do that, let's look at number 2 on the notebook. Staging the question. Sorry. Identify a social movement you would like to research. In the space below, discuss the relevance of this issue in consideration of the multiple levels of government, as well as how to address social issue policies. So you can pick an issue within this movement that we're looking at, the LGBTQ plus movement, or you could pick something from another movement, civil rights, women's rights, something else maybe that is important to you. You could also pull from that. Then we're going to go into Canvas, okay? And the first thing it's going to ask us to do, if you look at this, there's kind of 4 different charts you're going to be filling out, okay, and looking at. So the first one is, how does the movement's progress affected by public's reaction? So they're going to show you some sources throughout time periods. So it's important you look at the dates and kind of the circumstances to get context for when these public reactions were recorded or documented. And then you can use one or several to complete the section. How does the public reaction affect the movement? Advances, what parts do you think accelerated or helped to gain more support? Okay, maybe where did it fall short? Inhibits, are there any aspects that slow down the movement that maybe would cause people not to support the movement based on the sources that you're going to look at? And then timeline and significance. How does the information correspond with the nature of the movement as relative as maybe where it was on the outskirts of society becoming more mainstream accepted to actually seeing political movement to actually seeing laws change? So do you notice a correlation with the dates of the sources and where it's at in the movement? Okay, let's take a look really quick at a couple of these sources, okay? So for example, it says the first supporting question looks at the movement in terms of how the movement is affected by interactions between news media and public reaction. Okay, which that is the way we present a story, or the things that come out about a story and those kind of things can gain empathy from people. People can maybe where they weren't originally drawn towards something, they could be drawn toward it, or could cause them to kind of think twice. Or if you're kind of neutral or something, it could cause people to turn away from a movement or give them, you know, something, a feeling of not supporting. Okay, so it's important to kind of be objective when you're looking at the sources and how would this affect the movement, positive, negative, or in what way. So first, this is a trailer and clip from Screaming Queens. The riots at Compton's cafeteria can be viewed with the following links. So the links aren't hyperlinks. So what you can do is you can hyperlink it, copy and paste. You can go into a different tab, Control V.
An inside look.
It'll pull up where you can actually see video of this incident, Screaming Queens riot at the Compton cafeterias. And then you can kind of read the context of the situation, okay? And this goes back, this is 2005. But the scene from the Compton cafeterias goes back to 1966, 1990s. So it goes back quite a ways, decades, okay? So again, it's important to look at dates, you know, where in the movement is this source coming from, okay? And then evaluating it. We go down, here's another source. So the Philadelphia Report newspaper, and it's from 1974, okay? Era and homosexual marriages, all right? So again, kind of reading what was the perspective on how is media presenting this or discussing this topic to the public. 1974, I mean, this is almost 50 years ago, you know? So how might it have helped the movement or maybe hurt the movement as you're looking at as far as media interacting with people? Okay, here's another source, 1986, Bayard Rustin transcripts from the Montgomery to Stonewall speech, okay? So again, in the 1980s, how is this speech? It looks like there's quite a bit of reference through time and history, okay? How does this speech, how might this land to people? What is the theme? What points are trying to be made that might help gain support for the movement or might create a negative interaction between the media and people based on the movement, okay? So you go through each source. And again, you can use, I would use at least two, okay? And looking at this, so advances. So tell me which source. So maybe you do kind of, you know, tell me which source it is and what parts help accelerate the movement. So help gain support. In this case, there's a lot of reference of gay marriage or on views on homosexuality. So how might it accelerate? Which source and what do you think maybe help to accelerate or to gain momentum? Inhibits any aspects that slow down. So maybe one of the sources you would say, I could see where this probably hindered or hurt the movement, inhibited the movement, okay? Timeline significance. What maybe trend do you notice from 1966, 1974, and 1986 as it progresses over time? Do you notice a change in the tone? Do you notice a change in the perception, the way that the articles are being written? Okay. Then we're going to go to the next one. How have government leaders and policies, impacted the movement? So now they're going to have several sources. They're going to be from politicians within the movement, or at least talking about the movement or represent the movement. So maybe are part of the LGBTQ plus movement, are on empathizing or talking about the movement or giving a perspective on the movement, and how might that impact the movement, okay? So first one is from Harvey Milk, okay, who was in Congress, one of the first openly gay people in elected office and stuff. So this was a big deal. There's a movie that if you ever are interested, there's a really good, I think it was on Netflix. I don't know if it is still, stuff about his life and stuff. So this is a speech, hope speech, okay, at the San Francisco's Gay Freedom Pride Parade in 1978. Here's another, so this is an excerpt from various legislation impacts LGBTQ+, okay? So looking at dates of legislation, so laws that talked about either some aspect of, in this case, various legislation, so it's gonna be different things. So this one's from 1996, Defense of Marriage Act, okay? So what does it say about marriage and how they define it in 1996? Here we go, 2015. An act to amend the Indiana Code concerning civil procedures, religious freedom restoration enacted. So again, touching on different aspects of the movement. How is this stated? Is it in support of, or is it putting barriers toward the movement? So you can look at different ones. Here's from 1999. Here's another one, playing politics at the military expense. Okay, so again, an article, once again, the question of homosexuals in the military has come into the public view, resulting in President Clinton's assertion that the so-called don't ask, don't tell policy is flawed. And you're probably too old to remember that. If you've done a lot of research in the movement and stuff, then you've known about that. I grew up in the 90s, and so I remember the don't ask, don't tell, and the conversations around that and the debate around that in the late 90s, okay? So you could read a bit about this speech and approach toward the military. Lady Gaga, 2010. Okay, so a speech given at a rally in Maine. So again, looking at this, how have government leaders and policies impacted the movement? Okay, so again, what parts maybe help to accelerate the movement? Okay, so maybe looking through the legislation or looking through speeches or points people had to say that are within politics that are government officials or policies. How do they maybe help? Are there some shortfalls maybe? Are there anything that inhibits the progress? Okay, so anything you feel like, oh, this is not going to help the movement, or I could see where this definitely dragged it along or hurt the progress of the movement. And then timeline and significance. Again, what do you notice maybe from 1978 to 1996 to 1999 to 2010? You know, what do you notice with the tone? What kind of progression do you see? Because most of the time change is slow, okay? Where people are stubborn, and whatever the movement is, people are stubborn, they're set in their ways. So often where you see change is with generational shift. That's often where you see it. The younger generations growing up with whatever the movement is, in this case, we're looking at the LGBTQ plus movement, younger generations growing up with it, okay, are going to support more than older generations. And that's true of almost every movement, okay? Older generations, and that doesn't mean universally, it just means trends, okay? You often see less support for new movements or for more progressive movements. And younger generations, you'll see more support for movements, okay? And over time, someday you'll be old, and whatever the current movement is in 30 or 40 years, you'll see the shift. You're part of the young movement now and stuff, but that tends to be a trend when you look at history. Okay, we'll go back up here. Next section. How have Supreme Court cases and precedents influenced the movement? Okay, so again, same kind of thing going through there. They've pulled some samples. So this is Justice Kennedy, major opinion on Romer versus Evans, 1996. So it gives you some background on the Romer versus Evans. Was the first Supreme Court case to address LGBTQ plus rights issues since sodomy criminalization laws were ruled constitutional in Bowers versus Hardwick in 1986. The Romer case deals with Amendment 2, which was adopted by Colorado voters to their state constitution that precludes any legislative, executive, or judicial actions designed to protect persons from discriminations based on their homosexual, lesbian, or bisexual orientation, conduct, practice, or relationship. So then this is the majority opinion from this justice. Okay, we cannot accept the views of amendments prohibition on specific legal protections does not no more deprive homosexuals of special rights. To the contrary, the amendment imposes special disabilities upon the persons alone. Homosexuals are forbidden the safeguards that others enjoy or may seek with constraints. So again, going in and talking about this decision of how this piece of legislation is dealing with the movement. Okay, there's another example. So it's an oral transcript from Lawrence versus Texas on behalf of, Lawrence Gardner, petition 2003. So dissenting opinion, which means the opinion that didn't win. So the minority opinion, okay, is what this is coming from. So it gives background on the situation. Okay, so what's the background of the case? And then the dissenting opinion, which means it wasn't the majority opinion, which means it wasn't the ruling, but they're able to give where they disagree with the ruling. And then we see one from 1996. another Justice Kennedy, and another addressing. So a different case, but same year as the first one. Okay. So again, reading the background, and then how does it relate to the LGBTQ plus movement, and what and is it helping the movement or is it discouraging the movement? So then same thing. Number 5, how's the Supreme Court and precedents influence the movement? So what parts accelerated? So maybe look at 1 or 2 of the decisions, tell me which case, and how did it help or help to accelerate? How did it show support or maybe break some ground? Again, usually breaking of ground or progress is slow. So what step forward maybe do you see in that opinion, or dissenting or majority opinion, okay, or ruling? Are there any aspects to the opinion or the ruling that might inhibit the movement? Okay, was not helping progress the movement, is putting up barriers for the movement. So which one and what was said? And then again, what do you notice over the timeline? Okay, maybe from the 90s to early 2000s and seeing some of the other decisions. Okay, so you keep doing this with each tab, looking at it from a different point of view. What role do people within the LGBTQ plus community play in the movement? Okay, so again, looking at firsthand perspectives from people within, identifying within the movement, okay, the LGBTQ plus movement. All right, this one's from 2013, coming out to my father. Okay, so about that experience. We have some imagery. So again, reading the source, the featured source, is going to be really important, giving you kind of context and how to interpret the picture, some direction. You can tell that's in Washington, D.C. Okay, and then, oh, sorry, I guess I didn't show that. I was recording it, but I didn't. So on this last one, sorry, I'll review what I just said really quick. What role do people within the LGBTQ plus community play in the movement? So we're going to this last tab, and this will be for number 6, okay? And again, looking at the featured source, okay, so these are going to be coming from firsthand accounts of events or people within the movement, okay, so that identify with the LGBTQ plus movement, okay? So this one, coming out to my father, so it's from the New York Times, expert 2013, okay, about an experience of coming out to his dad. Okay, here's some imagery, AIDS quilt displayed on the mall. So this is in Washington, D.C., 1988. Okay, a lot of stigma in the 70s, 80s. Well, not really, sorry, so much the 70s, 80s, early 90s with AIDS and the homosexual communities, right? So that was a huge stigma back, especially in the 80s and 90s, for sure. So this would have a lot of impact. Again, maybe today not having as much impact from your present life and your experience of it, but looking back in history of the different paths and struggles within the movement, this was probably one of the top ones within the 80s of stigma and negative press and things that would go toward the community. Okay, so just like I was saying, you look at all the sources, assess the supporting question, develop a claim that addresses how the movement was uniquely affected by people within the community, okay? So account some of these experiences, okay? So I would say at least pick 2 and summarize, again, people within the community, what impact does it have? How is it unique? How does it show a struggle within or a progress or hope within the movement, okay? And then, go back up here. Okay, so we're going to go to next. And the very last section of the notebook, think about what you already know about the answer to the compelling question. Write about any connection. So why do you think it is important to learn about this concept? So the compelling question being, right, going back to our very first page, what makes a movement successful? So based on looking at these different charts and sources, public reactions to the movement and media, okay, government leaders and policies, Supreme Court decisions, people within the movement who are activists, who are pushing, who are making public and trying to progress the movement and stuff. So going back to that compelling question, what makes the movement successful? So looking at that compelling question, which can apply to really any movement, and then specifically applying it to the sources we're looking at within the LGBTQ plus movement, how do you see success within the movement? What things do you think? Do you think media was most impactful? Do you think government leaders? Do you think Supreme Court decisions? Like, what things do you think are making it successful? And again, often there's a sequence to it. It starts as a social movement on the outliers, then becoming more common or commonly accepted within the main communities, okay? Whether or not people identify with the movement, accepting of the movement, okay? Obviously, being a part of the movement, you'll be accepting. But even if you don't identify with the movement, but supporting the movement, that's the next step. Then you usually see politicians and run for office who support the movement. And it's a talking point. It's a way to get votes, right? It's a way to draw people to their party or to their side. Then we slowly see that eventually translate usually into legislation change, okay? So that would be laws. And that could be within the Supreme Court, or that could be things passed through the legislative branch on the House and the Senate, okay? And then obviously people within the community progressing that and speaking and talking to politicians and influencing laws and helping to write, going to court when needed, again, to progress the movement. So what makes a movement successful? It's going to be many different parts. So I would maybe address the social aspect of that. I would address the political aspect of that, media. Obviously, media support really helps a movement. And then eventually, the last thing that comes along is going to be laws. And we see that through court cases. And we see that through, so Supreme Court cases, oftentimes state legislative and federal legislation. Okay, so that's what's due for this week. Once you've completed that notebook, that number 7, I would do about a paragraph, okay, in order to get full credit. And then you're going to submit it here. Here's the rubrics. Okay, so each section's worth 20 points. So making sure that you are addressing, that you're filling in that graph really good. Okay, are those charts really good? You're giving me detail. I'd say at least 2 sources for each part of the chart. Okay. And that's it for this week. All right, if you have any questions, please email me or you can reach out. Okay, I will respond. You can always come to the Google Meet. All right, I hope you're having a really good week. We are halfway through the quarter. Progress grades come out this week, so I'm going to be sending emails again if you're not passing the class. Okay, thank you so much. Reach out if you need anything. Have a great night or day.